Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Borys Tizenhausen is here with you. There are a lot of interesting news stories in this episode. North Korea will send new soldiers to Russia for the summer offensive. Orban proposes turning Ukraine into a buffer zone. And Austria is preparing to say goodbye to its neutrality. Ukrainian drones are disabling the railways in southern Russia. And the State Department openly declares Putin has had enough of Trump. In response, the Kremlin says, "We will not end the war." Meanwhile, Azerbaijan is already demanding in an ultimatum that Moscow admit its guilt. All this and more will be covered in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. So if this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. So drones have attacked targets in the Leningrad region of the Russian Federation. In the morning, a series of explosions rocked the Vsevolozhsky district and Kronstadt. Around 100 flights have been cancelled at Pulkovo. Well, basically, it's business as usual. Action just the way Putin likes it. As they say, Sevastopol is waiting, Kamchatka is waiting, Kronstadt is waiting, or rather, they've already gotten what they were waiting for. But there's basically no fleet left in Sevastopol anymore. The Black Sea Fleet headquarters has been destroyed by missiles. Well, Kronstadt got hit today, and in Kamchatka, they're getting ready to defend themselves. I mean the Russians. The Pacific Fleet is conducting exercises there on how to properly fend off drones. Could Putin have ever imagined this? So today, July 27th, there was supposed to be a parade in St. Petersburg for Navy Day. The parade was cancelled. People are whining in local chats. How could this happen? Well, at least let's hold a little something. At least send out 2 boats. Where's the fighting spirit? Where is it? Where is it? No, it was cancelled. Putin arrived in St. Petersburg today. So that's how it all goes. Kind of meager with parades being cancelled. Well, what did you expect? Today there was an attack on the railway in the Oktyabrski district of the Volgograd region, and train delays have already started. Basically, the military logistics hubs in the south of the Russian Federation are being systematically destroyed. Apparently, these attacks have come as quite a surprise to the Russians. And it's clear that there aren't enough air defense systems to counter Ukrainian drones. And just so you understand the utter patheticness, pardon my French, of this cowardly henpecked man, to get revenge for the cancelled parade, he decided to strike Odessa. In fact, just as I started recording, shaheds were flying in from the sea toward Odessa. He's simply not capable of anything else. By the way, this is the first time in history that the parade for Navy Day has been cancelled. That's how things are. So right now, drones and drone operators are playing a crucial role. That's why, friends, I'm reminding you about our important fundraiser for the strike UAV crew of the 252nd Battalion. They're doing a great job destroying a significant amount of equipment and enemy personnel. And now they need to upgrade their heavy bomber, the Magura, a bit. We've already raised almost half of the needed amount. I'm asking you, please, let's help our soldiers. Right now, they really need it. The link to donate is in the description of this video and also in the comments. There you'll also find the details for those who want to help from abroad. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to you. You can't imagine how important the work we're doing is. And if you're not watching on my channel, which is possible, there's a QR code that takes you directly to the donation page. Let's help our soldiers. The head of the State Department stated that Trump is losing patience because of Putin's unwillingness to end the war. US President Donald Trump is determined to resolve the conflict, as stated in the press release. But his patience is running out because the Russian side is not taking steps to stop the invasion. This was stated by Marco Rubio. Let me remind you, Marco Rubio is one of the driving forces behind the imposition of sanctions. Well, of course, there is Mr. Kellogg, there is Lindsey Graham, and there are co-authors Mr. Blumenthal of this bill. But Marco Rubio plays his own role in negotiating with Russia from a tough position. I think, I quote Marco Rubio, that Trump is increasingly irritated by the fact that despite very good contacts with Putin, phone conversations, it has never led to anything. That's why it's time for some action. And I think the president made this absolutely clear. He is losing patience, losing his willingness to keep waiting for the Russian side to take any steps to end this war. That's what he said in his interview with Fox News, Marco Rubio. And here comes the response. Look, it was pretty quick and of course in a cynical form, classic for the Kremlin. The Kremlin stated that it is not going to stop the war in Ukraine. Russia, and here I'm quoting Peskov, despite the demands of the US, will continue the war against Ukraine until it achieves all the goals of the so-called special military operation. And this will need to be formalized. Peskov also added that the war declared by Putin will continue under conditions where these means have become impossible and all proposals for dialogue have been rejected. Seriously, by means, they mean some kind of non-military settlement. Seriously. How cynical can you get? And by the way, what about the goals? Yeah? Maybe somewhere on the Kremlin's website there's a list of the so-called special military operation goals. There's no such list. Makes perfect sense because there really are no goals. There are just attempts to survive, to stay in power. All these official statements are flexible and deceitful, so they can be adjusted to fit any outcome. So even if by the end of this war Putin can't keep fighting and only manages to capture a single village, the goals will still be tailored to match that result. Like, well, now we have one more village in Russia, or now the Sea of Azov is an internal sea, and so on. That's all there is to it. I specifically put together a selection about these goals. Here are 4 statements from Putin. On February 24, 2022, when he announced, the goal of the special operation is to ensure the protection of people who for 8 years have been subjected to abuse and genocide by the Kyiv regime. Demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, that is to protect the residents of Donbass, denazification, demilitarization. What does Zaporizhia and Kherson have to do with this? How did they come into the picture later? You see, that's how it was at the beginning. Now it's about Zaporizhia and Kherson. Who was he planning to save there? Was anyone there subjected to abuse, genocide? And what about the fact that the residents of these regions themselves kicked his thugs out of Kherson? I mean, Here's another statement from Putin. It's already 2023. The goal is denazification, demilitarization, and a neutral status for Ukraine. See, now neutral status appears. December 26, 2024. Russia will continue to pursue all its objectives. At this point, their story shifted to the point where they even stopped specifying them. Denazification, demilitarization. We must achieve all our objectives, just like what I read to you from Peskov. And in the first half of 2025 at the Security Council meeting, attention, the goal and purpose of the so-called special military operation is to fight for the interests of the Russian people, for a long-term peace based on the interests of everyone living in the region. Now, his goal is fighting for the interests of the Russian people. First, he was saving the residents of Donbass, then it was denazification, demilitarization. In short, tomorrow there will be new goals. So there's no need to remember these. Now, Orban, Putin's attack dog, has gone off the leash and declared that Ukraine cannot be admitted to the EU because it would bring war to the heart of Europe. He has made similar statements before, but look at what he's proposing this time. Instead, Orban suggests that Ukraine should become a buffer zone between Russia and Europe, cooperating with the European Union based on a strategic partnership contract, a contract that can be stopped or adjusted at any time. Today, to quote Orban, today Ukraine's fate is to be a buffer state bordering Russia. It may be uncomfortable, it may be unpleasant, and some may want to break free from it, but the fact is, you can't change your address, Orban stated. You see what a mess this is, right? You can't change your address. But let's start with the fact that he is already openly denying Ukraine's sovereignty. In other words, calling Ukraine a buffer means stripping it of its agency, saying that, well, Russia and Europe will decide among themselves how to use this buffer. It's the same logic, by the way, as Putin's. Ukraine is not independent, it's a sphere of influence. So how come you're taking such a beating from a supposedly non-independent state, huh? You're even canceling parades, for example. So why did he show up in St. Petersburg anyway? To watch some kind of military exercises or something? By the way, I think he might be in for a surprise there, possibly. And as for the buffer zone, we've heard about that somewhere before, haven't we? And not from Orban. Putin was planning to create a buffer zone here in Ukraine. So basically, Orban is just blatantly repeating it now. Except he wants the whole of Ukraine to become a buffer zone. And of course, he's offering a fake initiative instead of full EU membership. A kind of cooperation that can be rolled back at any moment. And who is it? Is he proposing some kind of Budapest memorandum? A cheap trap that doesn't provide any guarantees at all? So basically, where should we strike right now? With these statements, Orban is digging his own grave. He's showing Orban is, first of all, contradicting the general policy of the European Union, while at the same time bargaining with Brussels for money. I'll tell you about that now. You're about to be blown away by yet another statement. And the very idea of European solidarity is being discredited. So basically, there's this one particular pterodactyl of the world sitting there, squawking loudly and incessantly, and still persistently asking for more money. About changing the address, I'd like to gently remind you, well, really, if you absolutely cannot change the address, I'd like to emphatically remind you that the Hungarians originally came to where they are now from somewhere between the Ob River and the Ural Mountains, from far beyond the Urals themselves. That is, from Western Siberia. They came, no need to change the address. It wouldn't be a bad idea. Of course, I'm being ironic right now. I actually very much distinguish between Orban's policies and the opinions of the Hungarian people. It's no coincidence that Orban is making tremendous efforts to convince them that Ukraine shouldn't be in the European Union. It's not working out very well. The opposition is gaining serious momentum in Hungary, so I get it. But still, Orban personally, along with his corrupt government, could just go back beyond the Urals to their historical homeland. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We're giving you, as they say, the most extreme content possible. Let me remind you, glory to Ukraine is considered an extremist slogan. So here, all of us are a little bit extremist, and some of us are even serious extremists. I think many have noticed that for Orban, preventing Ukraine from joining the European Union is almost an obsession. He's conducting some kind of poll, launching advertising campaigns, plastering all of Hungary with billboards, running commercials. He's sparing no effort, no expense. And of course, it's necessary to hit the funding. Ideally, support for Ukraine should be tied to this. That's for our partners. By the way, we're discussing this topic, support for Ukraine and restricting Hungary's access to European Union funds. In fact, the Netherlands has already advocated for this. Mark Rutte put forward a similar idea. Germany, Belgium as well. So this rhetoric just needs to be strengthened. What do you mean? Well, not actively helping a sovereign country that is currently at war, the one that was brutally attacked, is, in essence, to completely nullify fundamental European values. A country like that cannot receive European funds if that's the kind of divisive rhetoric it consistently espouses. It all makes perfect sense. With the right approach, Ukraine is capable of creating systemic problems for Orban. That's true. I think that's what awaits him, unless, of course, he's ousted next year when the elections take place. Because there are all the signs that the era of the Trojan Magyar's 15-year rule is coming to an end. And what I'm saying now is just hang in there. I don't know. Viktor Orban should probably be called Cringe-Slav instead of his given name Viktor, because it truly feels like he consistently generates an immense amount of cringe on an industrial scale. So attention! Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stated that his country will not support the adoption of the European Union budget until Budapest receives the frozen EU funds. Quote, "Until we get what is rightfully ours, there will be no new budget. We will get this money back and will not make any concessions on matters of sovereignty." It's simple. So, here's a character who pays $1 billion into the European Union's coffers and takes out $2.5. He has two tranches frozen, 8 and 4 billion euros and 9.5. That is, one is the COVID fund and the other, I don't remember, the cohesion fund. 18 billion are frozen for him because he isn't carrying out reforms, because he set up an autocracy there, cracked down on the media, and so on and so forth. He's taken control of the courts. He says, "I'm not leaving here. I won't let anyone pass the budget until you hand over my money." As they say. What nerve, right? Just unbelievable. Well, and here comes our segment. Not a day without a Putin victory. Austria is ready to discuss joining NATO and abandoning its neutrality because of the Russian Federation, or more precisely because of the Russian Federation's aggression, according to the country's foreign minister. Quote, "It is clear that neutrality alone will not protect us in the face of an increasingly uncertain global security situation and a more aggressive Russia. Austria is protected by investments in our defense capabilities as well as by partnerships." So 70 years of neutrality, and now that's it? No. We took a look at that nutcase over there, the one sitting in Russia. No. Putin has done the impossible to expand NATO, simply impossible. No one has done as much for NATO expansion. Putin is a NATO agent. By the way, he should be awarded a pennant posthumously. All in all, this is a fiasco for Russia. The Kremlin has always used Austria, by the way, as a kind of quiet, neutral, convenient and compromise haven. Kremlin money found refuge there, all sorts of oligarchs, Gazprom interests, and even some Russian politicians. So now this bastion of neutrality has cracked. That's how it is. No worries, at least there's the CSTO, a club for senile old men. Now this news I liked. I can't ignore it. The fountains in Rostov-on-Don will be turned off and drained during the celebrations of the Russian Navy Day on July 27th, today, and also on Airborne Forces Day, August 2nd. Do you understand what's happening? So the parade was cancelled in St. Petersburg and now they're draining the fountains. They simply decided to drain the fountains for the Neanderthals so they wouldn't swim there, because the airborne forces, in the context of the Russian Federation, are no longer about paratroopers, but rather it's always images of some drunk, pot-bellied guys in striped shirts constantly fighting with someone. So they decided to drain the fountains for them. The authorities are afraid of their own heroes. Of course, that's just great. But when the heroes, in quotation marks, of course, if we're talking about Russian occupiers, return, when these so-called heroes come back from the war, every day will be Airborne Forces Day for them. There will be all that craziness. Those who come back after serving time, whose sentences will be wiped clean, they'll return, and the most fun will begin when the state stops paying them the money it's paying now. They've already gotten used to living like that. That's when things will get really interesting, and they definitely will stop, that's for sure. They'll be thrown out in exactly the same way, just like when people first came back from Afghanistan. What heroes, they said, and then the propaganda turned against them. So, being an Afghan vet became synonymous with being some kind of messed up character. In every movie, there was always some former Afghan vet who would show up, sometimes on the side of evil, sometimes on the side of good. The same thing will happen here, but this time there will be hundreds of thousands coming back, and some people are getting their sentences wiped clean, so that's how it is. Well, there's one more. By the way, besides Orban, there's another scoundrel. Kim Jong-un is planning a new intervention in the war against Ukraine. Reuters reports that Pyongyang will send additional troops to Russia as early as August because they are receiving from Moscow technologies for launching satellites, missile guidance, and so on, since they are also supplying shells. Well, that's how it is. The timing for the additional troop deployment is supposedly August. This was stated by a South Korean lawmaker in a conversation with Reuters. So Moscow is preparing for a large-scale offensive, and South Korean intelligence believes that Russia is planning a major offensive operation specifically in August, and that the possible involvement of North Korean units is directly related to this. Yes, there was information that supposedly somewhere in the rear, North Korean soldiers are supposed to replace Russians, and all the Russians are being sent forward into the offensive. But I have my doubts about that. Well, we'll see how it turns out. At the very least, this is nothing new for our armed forces. And Pyongyang has already started a new mobilization. But in general, Kim Jong-un is quite a piece of work. He is helping Putin a lot. Maybe not as much as China, but he's still helping quite a bit. They have a strategic partnership. They cover each other's dictatorial backs with Putin. What have we come to? The one whom Putin used to just, with a snap of his fingers, look at like a pile of garbage, is now a brother, comrade, and friend. But of course, he even opened an entire resort for Russians, but a few days later, Kim Jong-un closed it. Probably the Russians didn't like it there. In general, if we're talking about regimes, Kim Jong-un is pure sabotage. Cyber fraud all over the world is running like clockwork under him, controlled at the state level. In fact, cyber criminals make money for the regime by stealing from accounts all over the world. Well, North Korean intelligence agencies have another scheme as well, which was recently uncovered. How is it that their minds work so well when it comes to evil and destruction? Why not create something normal for a change? Even that water park he built has a view of the missile launch pad, the very missiles he uses to threaten the whole world. Anyway, here's another scheme from North Korean intelligence. Using clever tricks and artificial intelligence, they managed to get their people remote jobs at major companies, mostly American ones. Once these employees got in and gained certain access, they would steal personal data, intellectual property, developments, and so on and so forth. In short, they were stealing classified information. According to the US Department of Justice, around 100 American companies unknowingly hired such employees. The peak of this happened during the pandemic, when many people were working remotely. In fact, almost everyone was working remotely at that time. So that's how it went. And they managed to steal a ton of data and all sorts of things. By the way, the cooperation between North Korea and Russia is a major problem for South Korea. I recently saw a report saying that South Korea is ignoring the monster under the bed. Well, if we're talking about Kim Jong-un, that's basically true. Because everything North Korea is doing now, helping Russia, building new factories, ones like Alabuga, similar facilities are now being built in North Korea as well. They'll be churning out drones too, and they'll be making missiles. But for what purpose? Is all of this just going to sit in a warehouse or something? No, if before Kim Jong-un's only threat was, I'll fire all my artillery, and he has tens of thousands of those guns. Just like that. But now he's going to have drones, missiles? Well, actually, he already has missiles. He's constantly testing them. I recently saw that Kim Jong-un is building the largest military factory in North Korean history at the Hichon base in Jagang province. So it's going to be a gigantic factory. This factory will produce high-precision machines. Obviously, equipment will be brought in through gray schemes. In short, there's modernization of old factories, retooling for new components. All of that is happening. For example, in 2025, Kim Jong-un personally inspected the modernization of an artillery shell factory in Hamhung for export to Russia. That is, shell production has increased several times over. Many factories have expanded their facilities, and there are plenty of such examples. In the same Yogang, for instance, a factory is being retooled to produce cruise missiles and their components. So, in other words, everything there is moving at full speed. That's why new sanctions are needed. Well, naturally, China's involvement is obvious behind all of this. Of course, naturally. But North Korea isn't just ramping up its military capabilities. It's turning its defense industry into a global weapons manufacturing operation that is fully integrated with the needs of the Russian Federation. So, for example, when we look at what's happening now, it's not just about how much Russia can produce. We also have to consider how much North Korea is producing, because millions of shells have been supplied to the Russian Federation. And from Azerbaijan, yet another jab at Putin. A really solid, juicy one at that. Baku is waiting for Moscow to acknowledge responsibility for the plane crash, said Hikmet Hajiev, assistant to the president of Azerbaijan. In other words, he's saying directly, we expect an admission of responsibility. We're waiting. And it turns out, well, you remember this tragic story? 38 people died, shot down by a Russian air defense system. At first, they lied about some gas cylinder exploding on the plane, then about some birds, then something else, and then they sent a team to Kazakhstan. But just think about it, they haven't even admitted their guilt. So Baku is waiting for Moscow to admit fault. How cynical do you have to be not to admit it? Well, they didn't admit anything about MH17 either. So friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. If possible, please support the fundraiser for our soldiers. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and of course, glory to Ukraine.